For this week, we're going to continue with Chapter 9. Now, as I mentioned before, there are going to be three main macroeconomic goals that we have as an economy. The first one is going to be to have stable prices. Secondly, we want low unemployment. And then lastly, we want sustained or high economic growth. Now, we keep an eye on these three just to measure the overall health of the economy. Now, since we've already focused on the unemployment section last week, now we're going to look at the other goal, which is going to be these stable prices. Since stable prices is a macroeconomic goal, we'll be looking at the prices of all products and not just a single product. So we're going to be looking at an aggregate price average. So for this week, our chapter objectives are going to be to define inflation, and we're going to look at how it's measured. We're going to use our consumer price index to estimate the effects of inflation on prices. We're going to describe the main causes of inflation, and we're also going to look at the economic consequences of inflation. Now, inflation by definition is just going to be a general rise in the price of goods and services. Now, under conditions of inflation, the prices of things are rising over time. So, to put it differently, whenever inflation occurs, that means that every dollar that you own buys a smaller percentage of a good or service. So, when prices rise, essentially the value of money falls. Now, the value of the dollar or any unit of money that we're using is going to be expressed in the terms of its purchasing power, which is the amount of real tangible goods or actual services that the money can buy at that moment in time. So when we have inflation, there's going to be this decline in the purchasing power of money. So going forward, as we look at the price level, it's going to reference the buying power of money. So with inflation being an increase in the average prices, we also have to take into account how wages are changing over time. Now, as this slide states, although prices have risen significantly over time, so if I'm using this example of McDonald's menu from 1953. So we see the price of this thirst quenching Coke was 10 cents. The price of this hamburger was 15 cents. Now, of course, we all know that those prices are going to be a lot higher today if you were to go to McDonald's. But even though prices have risen significantly over time, wages have risen as well. Now, as we look at some of the underlying causes of inflation, we're going to see that it's going to be a measure that changes the cost of living. Now, some of these factors that cause inflation could be demand factors. So, as we have here with our demand factors, consumers' confidence, income, and wealth, all those play a part in inflation. Now, this is what we call demand pull inflation, where increases in demand pulls prices up. So, the first example that I have listed here is consumer confidence. Now, this goes back to our chapter on GDP and total spending. Now, we said that when unemployment is low and wages are stable, consumers are more confident and more likely to spend money. This confidence drives up prices as manufacturers and providers charge more for goods and services that are going to be in high demand. So, we looked at with our business cycle, when consumers are spending more, firms are going to be running out of goods, so they're going to have to increase the price. So, as we see, that can also come from increases in income. As people have more money to spend, they tend to buy more goods. As they buy more goods and certain things become in greater demand, we'll see that firms are going to increase their price. Now, secondly, we see supply shocks can cause inflation. This is what we call cost push inflation, where increases in inputs or factors of production cause firms to increase their price. And then we have government policy. So this deals with the government's ability to borrow and print money. And we'll look at later why the government just can't print money and the detrimental effects that can have on the economy. Now, to obtain prices in order to measure inflation, we're going to look at the price level. Now, the price level, by definition, is going to be a measure of the average prices of goods and services in the economy. Now, we're going to refer to the percentage increases in the price level from one year to the next as the inflation rate. Now, the two commonly used ones are going to be this consumer price index, which we're going to focus on today, and then we also have the producer price index. Now, the way that the Consumer Price Index works is pretty much to obtain the prices of a representative group of goods and services. The Bureau of Labor Statistics surveys over 14,000 households on their spending habits. Now, the survey is used to construct what we'll call a market basket of 211 types of goods and services that the typical urban family of four would consume. So this is our market basket. Now this chart here shows how those goods are broken down into several different categories, whether it's housing, food and beverage, education and communication, medical care, and transportation. Now each month the Bureau's price collectors contact retail stores, homeowners, and tenants in selected cities throughout the United States. And based on these monthly accounts or amounts, the Bureau of Labor Statistics records average prices for a market basket of goods bought once again by that typical urban family of four. Now, when we get to measuring inflation, we talked about the different types that we have. The Consumer Price Index, which measures the retail price level. This is going to be our main one that we're going to be using. And then we also have the Producer Price Index, which measures wholesale prices. And then the GDP deflator, which measures the average prices of all items in GDP. Now, if you recall, our components of GDP was consumption, personal consumption, gross private domestic investment, government spending, and net exports. So we'll be using the Consumer Price Index because that's going to be a little bit more indicative of what the typical consumer would be purchasing. This GDP deflator here would take into account things that the average consumer wouldn't be purchasing, such as things that fall in the government category. So the typical consumer is not out buying tanks or anything like that. Now, inflation is going to be measured against this market basket. Now, since there's over 200, well, around 211 items that the Bureau is tracking, some prices in that market basket might rise, while some items in that market basket might be falling. But overall, we'll see that the price level increases whenever there's inflation. So remember, inflation is going to be an increase in the average price level. If just the price of one item is increasing, that doesn't mean that we have inflation. It has to be an increase in the overall average. Now, in order to calculate the CPI, or this Consumer Price Index, there's going to be three things that we need. First off is going to be the basket of the goods. So once again, we said that the Bureau of Labor Statistics has over 211 different types of goods that they are monitoring. We're going to look at the cost to purchase the basket of the goods in the base year. Now this term base year, the base year just pretty much is going to be a comparison for a measure of any type of business activity or economic index. It's going to serve as our starting point or our benchmark that we can track how prices are rising over time. And then lastly, we need the prices in the current year. So the typical example that you'll see on your homework and on the exam will look like this. So we have our market basket. So we said the three things that we need is the basket of goods. In this example here, the eye exams, pizza, and books make up our market basket. So we have a very simple market basket, just three items compared to the 211. So we have the market basket, we have the cost to purchase the goods in the base year. So our base year in this example is going to be 2010. So we see the price of eye exams are $50, the price of pizzas are $10, and books cost $25 a piece. And then we'll also have the prices in the current year. So we're going to compare our base year 2010 to 2018 and then also to 2019. So let's calculate it. Now, in order to find our expenditures, we're going to see in 2010 how much does it cost us to purchase this market basket. So to find how much we're spending on eye exams, we just simply take the quantity of eye exams times the price, and we see that we will be spending $50 on eye exams. For pizzas, if you're buying 20 pizzas at the price of $10 a piece, 20 times 10 is going to give us $200. And then also for the books. If we're buying 20 books at the price of $25 a piece, that's going to cost us $500. Now, if we total that amount up, that comes to $750. So this market basket will cost us $750 in our base year of 2010. Now, what we'll do is see in 2018 how much does that same market basket cost us. Now we see that in 2018 the price of eye exams goes up to $100 from $50. The price of pizzas have increased to $15, and the price of books have stayed the same. Now when you're calculating your market basket cost, we're going to always assume that you're purchasing the same quantity no matter what. So our quantity here does not change. So we're still buying one eye exam, but now it costs us $100. So in 2018, this will be $100 spent on eye exams. For the pizzas, if it costs $15 and we're still buying 20, 15 times the 20 is going to give us $300. And then lastly, for the books, if they cost $25 a piece and we're buying 20 books, that's going to cost us $500. So to purchase the same market basket in 2018 now is going to cost us $900. So we see that price increase has caused that market basket to increase in total amount spent. Now in 2019, we're going to do the same thing, but now we see that the price of eye exams are $85. Pizzas have dropped to $14 from the previous year, but now books have gone up in price to $27.50. So we're still assuming that you're buying the same quantity, so our quantity hasn't changed. So if we buy one eye exam at the price of $85, that's going to cost us $85. If we're buying 20 pizzas at the price of $14 a piece, that'll cost us $280. And then if we're buying 20 books at $27.50 a piece, that is going to cost us $550. So the same market basket in 2019 is going to cost us $915. So the table above gives us the information that we need to create the CPI for 2018 and 2019 using the basket of goods from 2010. So our formula for creating a CPI, our CPI is always going to be equal to the expenditures in the current year so the expenditures in the current year divided by the expenditures in the base year times 100. So if we look at, for 2018, we said the amount that it will cost us to buy this market basket in 2018 would be $900. To buy that same basket in our base year was $750. So 900 divided by 750 times 100 is going to give us 120. So we will say that our CPI for 2018 will be 120. Now if we look at 2019, we're going to follow the same steps. The expenditures in 2019 was $915, and our base year cost us $750. 915 divided by 750 times 100 will give us 122. So our CPI for 2019 will be 122. Now, based on the data, we can get our inflation rate from 2018 to 2019. So remember, our inflation rate is just going to be the percentage change in the consumer price index. So your formula for the annual rate of inflation is going to be CPI new minus your CPI old, or that in the previous year, all over CPI old times 100. So as we're going from 2018 to 2019, we always use the most recent year as our new values. So the CPI in 2019 would be 122 minus our CPI in 2018, which was 120, all over 120 times 100. And that'll come up to 1.7%. So we'll say that from 2018 to 2019, prices on average have increased by 1.7%. So since the CPI measures consumer prices, it's often referred to as the cost of living index. So CPI and inflation is sometimes used to generate a fair increase in wages for workers and government benefits. So a lot of union contracts have this cost of living index tied into their annual raises. Now we can have inflation, which is going to be an increase in the average price level, and then we can also have disinflation. So let's say that we had, let's say for a couple of different years, and then we look at the inflation rate over those few years. So let's do 2014 to 2015 to 2016 to 2017. So let's say that our rate of inflation was 3%, 5%, 1%, and then negative 2%. Now, anytime you have a positive number, that means that we have inflation because prices are increasing on average. So remember, our rate of inflation just measures the change from the CPI from the CPI in the previous year to the CPI in the newer or the more recent year. Now, if we have disinflation, disinflation will occur right here from 2015 to 2016. Disinflation is going to be a reduction in the rate of inflation. So prices are still rising, but it's at a slower pace. So from 2014 to 2015, we see that prices have increased by from 3% to 5%. But now in 2016, we see that it goes to 1%. We still have inflation because prices are going up because this is a positive number, but it's at a slower rate than it was the previous year. Now, deflation occurs when there's a decline in the price level, so prices on average are falling. Deflation will occur right here because we see that we have this negative number. So anytime your rate of inflation is negative, that means that on average the prices are going down. Now, you might think that decreases in prices is a good thing because it gives consumers greater purchasing power, and to some degree, moderate drops in certain products such as food or energy do have some positive effects on consumer spending. However, a general persistent fall in prices can have severe negative effects on growth and also economic stability. Now, deflation typically occurs in or after periods of economic crisis, as we looked at in our business cycles. So when an economy experiences like a severe recession or a depression, that's when we see economic output slowing down and demand for consumption and investment drops. So deflation is not always is not going to be considered a good thing because that means typically we're at some type of economic crisis. Now, the CPI is going to be a quantitative measure, and with just about any quantitative measure, could be some discrepancies. So some potential problems with the CPI include these four bias. We have our substitution bias. Now, the substitution bias states that consumers may change their purchasing habit away from goods that have increased in price. Now, if we go back to our CPI calculation here, we assume that even though the price of these goods changed over time, that consumers always bought that same quantity, which isn't the case. Normally, if prices go up, consumers will switch to buying other goods. Our increase in quality bias is going to be our second one. This means that it's difficult to separate improvements in quality from increases in price, say in cars or computers. So, for instance, the price of cars have increased dramatically over the years. However, you can do a lot more in your car now. Some cars come with built in Wi Fi, some cars have the rear view camera, some cars can self park. So, there's going to be this increase in quality, so it's kind of difficult to separate the improvements in quality from just that increase in price. Our third bias is going to be the new product bias. Now, this states that the basket of goods used to change only every 10 years. So there's going to be a delay in including new goods like cell phones or tablets. Now, of course, we know that in a dynamic growing economy, new goods are constantly being introduced and new buying options become available. You can probably come up with some examples of goods that are produced now that weren't produced 25 to 30 years ago, like your tablets, flash drives, cell phones. All those weren't in the typical consumer basket. Now, traditionally, the Bureau of Labor Statistics only updated the market basket of goods used in computing the CPI every 10 years. So, new products introduced between updates were not included in the basket. Now, typically, the prices of many products like your phones, TVs, or whatever it might be tend to decrease in years after they're introduced. Now, if the basket isn't updated frequently, these price decreases are not going to be included in the CPI, therefore overstating inflation. So that's our new product bias. And our outlet bias states that the CPI used to only survey prices at a traditional retail outlet. So that's going to be like your brick and mortar stores. So when you actually go to a physical location to buy things, now it tries to minimize the bias by surveying people about where they actually buy products. Now, most of the time, new retail outlets such as internet stores typically offer lower prices than the traditional retail stores. So if you're shopping on Amazon or eBay or even at some of the cost saving stores like Costco or Sam's Club. Now, if the Bureau of Labor Statistics continue to check prices only at traditional retail stores, they'll overstate the prices that some consumers are actually paying for the goods and services if they're buying them online at cheaper alternatives. Now, because of this, or these four biases that we just covered, economists believe that the CPI overstates true inflation by zero point 0.5 to 1 percentage point. Now, once again, the Producer Price Index measures the average change in the prices received by domestic producers for their output. This isn't going to be one of the index that we're going to use. We're typically going to focus on the consumer, so the Consumer Price Index is going to be the main one that we'll be utilizing. Now, using the price index, we can use, by using the CPIs from previous years, we can use that to adjust for effects of inflation. So I have the scenario here, and it says, suppose your mother received a salary of $25,000 in 1991. Now, of course, this would have bought much more than a salary of $25,000 in 2016 or even now in 2019. But what we can do is we can use the CPI to estimate the purchasing power of that $25 and put it in 2016 dollars, so to see what will be the equivalent. So we have a formula for that. Now that formula states that the value in 2016 dollars is going to be equal to the value in the previous year times our CPI, in this case in 2016, divided by the CPI in that previous year. So you can substitute this 2016 for whatever that new year is or whatever year you're converting that money to. So it could say like the value in 2019's dollars is going to be equal to the value in the previous year times the CPI in 2019 divided by whatever that CPI is in the previous year. So let's substitute in our values. Now, we said that in 1991 she received a salary of $25,000. So the value in the previous year was $25,000. Most of the time the CPIs will be provided for you. So the CPI for 2016 was 240, and the CPI for 1991 was 136. So if we took the $25,000 times the 240 and divided by 136, that will equal $44,000. Well, $44,118. So $25,000 in 1991 would have bought about the same amount as around $44,000 in 2016. So let's look at some other examples. And this one is going to come from that menu that we had earlier. Let's look at this chocolate shake here, this triple thick shake that cost 20 cents back in 1953. So let's use our formula. So the value today is going to be equal to the value in the previous year times, we'll say CPI new over CPI old. So the new would just represent the value that we're converting it to, and the old will represent the value in that previous year. So just to kind of keep with that same CPI, we're going to use 2016. So our CPI for 1953 was equal to 26.9, and our CPI in 2016, let's say, was 240. So using our formula, we'll say the value today, or in 2016, so value in 2016 is going to be equal to the value in the previous year, so it was 20 cents, times our CPI new, so our 2016 CPI, which was 240, over the previous CPI, which was 26.9. So if we take 0.2 times 240 divided by 26.9, the value in 2016 would be equal to $1.78. All right, and we can use this for salaries. So other salaries, let's say for comparing sports athletes or comparing baseball player salaries from previous years to today to see if they're underpaid or overpaid. Now, some of the consequences of inflation pretty much shrinks income. So inflation can decrease your standard of living by decreasing the purchasing power of money. Now, of course, the greater the rate of inflation, the greater the decline in goods that we can purchase with our nominal income. Now, this term nominal just means unadjusted. So your nominal income is going to be the actual number of dollars received over a period of time. So let's say you're working at a job right now making $15 per hour. That's your nominal income because that will be valued in 2019's dollars. Now, what we'll typically do is convert those nominal values to real values. Now, we use our formula here to get our real value. So real value is equal to your nominal times the base year index divided by the current year's CPI. So let's look at an example. So let's say that you're making, let me see if I can bring up a blank slide. All right, so suppose you're making $50,000 per year, and your boss is going to give you a $2,000 raise. So your boss is going to give you a $2,000 raise. Now, if inflation is expected to be 5%, if inflation is expected to be 5% next year, are you better or worse off? So this is a typical question that you might see on your homework or on the exam. So let's track it. So we have our income and we'll have the CPI. So in 2018, where you're currently making $50,000, and let's say that this is our starting point, so our CPI is going to be 100, and we're comparing that to 2019 when you would get the raise and it went up to $52,000. But if we have a 5% increase in prices, our CPI would be 105 here. So what we can do is use that formula for our real income. So we said real values are going to be equal to your nominal. Your nominal income times 100 all over your CPI. So in our example here, for 2019, your nominal income is going to be this $52,000. So $52,000 times 100 all over 105, because our CPI for 2019 is 105, which means that your real income is going to be equal to $49,523. So what we see here is that you're actually worse off because you're making less than you were the previous year. So in order to be as well off as you were previously, you would need to have an increase of at least 5%. So what would that come out to? You would need to get a $2,500 raise. Now, just as we can have our nominal income and real income, we can also have nominal interest rates, and we also have our real interest rates. Now, when you lend money to someone, they typically agree to pay you back with interest. Now, if the interest rate is 6%, for example, then a $1,000 loan paid back in a year will be paid back with an additional $60, totaling that $1,060. Now, 6% is going to be that nominal interest rate, once again, the unadjusted amount. So your nominal rate are always going to be the stated interest rate on a loan. However, we want to adjust that for inflation, so we want to calculate this real interest rate here. So your real interest rate is going to be equal to your nominal interest rate minus inflation. So minus the inflation rate. So once again, if we have this nominal value of 6%, and then our example here says if prices increase by 2% from this year to the next, so your inflation rate is 2%. So then that will make our real interest rate 4%. So this more accurately reflects the cost of borrowing and lending money. So we want to make sure that we're taking or we're adjusting these values for inflation. Now, these last few slides discuss some of the people who benefit from inflation, some who are harmed from the inflation, and also people who are unaffected, and then also some of the consequences of hyperinflation. So hopefully this helps. I'll try to get some more videos posted if you need some more practice with computing the CPI or calculating the inflation rate.